Welcome to the More Perfect Union, the podcast that offers real debate without the hate. I'm Kevin Kelton, and I'm pleased, as always, to be sharing the mic with Rebecca Kushmider.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Kushmider, and I am here with Aura. I have transcended Riz, and I am bringing the Aura. I am Sigma.
What language is that?
Gen Alpha. Which
Alpha.
is, your current middle schoolers. These are words that they're using. Skibbity Ohio, Kevin. That's all I can say.
Skibbity Ohio.
Or skibbity toilet. I mean.
I don't know what you just said to me, but I'm going to assume.
Neither do I, actually.
And if you're about auras this week, DJ McGuire is about applesauce. Hello, DJ.
Good evening. I do have to correct Rebecca on one thing. Aura is actually downstairs. She is not here with us.
No, Aura, A-U-R-A, not your lovely spouse.
Not my wife. Okay. All right. But yes, greetings from Hampton Roads, Virginia, everybody.
And DJ, do you want to share with people why you might be eating a little applesauce as we do the podcast tonight?
Oh, yes. I am recovering from a tonsillectomy. So I'm still on the soft food diet, which means absolutely I am not allowed to eat any pets.
Oh, good. That will come as a relief to the citizens of Springfield. Oh, DJ, you're right about something. Speaking of things that feel good to hear, I saw today that there was something about Polish residents of Pennsylvania endorsing Kamala Harris over Ukraine. So you're right. People care about Ukraine. I thought it might just be you.
Surprise.
So let's talk about the state of the race. As everyone who's watched any cable news knows over the last week or so, Harris has seemingly made some steady gains in favorability, although the polls, depending on which one you look at, some are very positive for her. Some seem more positive for her opponent, Donald Trump, or at least show maybe a little bit more tightness in some of the swing states. But we're going to dive into that. DJ, let's start with polls. You are, of course, our resident expert in all things statistical, and you have quite a bit of knowledge about polling. And you found some, what you consider, and I consider, and I'm going to imagine that Rebecca considers, some fascinating questions in the subtabs of the New York Times poll that didn't seem quite as positive for Kamala Harris as some might have expected. So what did you find?
So, and I've been complaining about this on this podcast and on our Substack site, that the New York Times, which Siena poll, which has been arguably the most favorable to Trump outside of partisan polling, also shows us how they sample by area type, and I mean urban, suburban, or rural. Now, a number of pollsters won't tell you how they do it. A number of pollsters won't sample it that way at all. They have numerous other ways, education, gender, age, all the normal things. But the Times also shows the area types, and the area types have little, if anything, in common with what the Edison Research 2020 exit poll showed of the population. And to give you
the population of actual voters,
the voters, the voting, the folks who came to vote, and in particular, they oversample. The Times oversamples rural voters in every national poll they've had and in every state poll they've had. And the reason this is important is because urban voters are much more likely to vote Democratic. Suburban voters either lean Democratic or lean Republican, depending upon what state you're in. And rural voters across the country are very heavily Republican. So if you have a poll that oversamples rural voters, it's going to look more, your voting group is going to look more Republican than it actually should be. And that's something I've been complaining about for some time with the Times Siena poll. And a couple of other pollsters give their area type divisions, And some are a little more urban than they should be, and some are less urban than they should be if they're comparing it to 2020. But the New York Times is the only one that that in my mind is consistently bad. Now, I'm not saying the 2024 electorate will look exactly like the 2020 electorate. That's silly. We all know that's not the case. But given what has happened between 2020 and 2024, given what has happened over the last 4 years, the last thing that I would expect would be an electorate that is less suburban and more rural, particularly an electorate that is less suburban and more rural than any electorate we have seen going back at least 15 to 20 years.
Well, not only that, I spent some time digging into other metrics, including census data. The sample of rural voters that the Times is attributing to A, the national population, and B, state populations such as North Carolina, is larger than what those rural populations are. So to suggest that 35% of the national electorate is rural when only 20% of the national population is rural seems like giving a lot more credit to rural voters than to suburban and urban voters. But it also seems like, from what Nate Cohen was saying on Twitter today, that they have redefined the word rural to include things that are not rural. But even accounting for that and, sort of splitting their suburban number and taking back some rural votes into their suburban number, it still doesn't come close to what the actual exit polls from 2020 and 2022 were, or verified voter data that Pew has been collecting since 2016.
Right. And just one example, I think is the best example, and then Kevin, you can jump in. In Georgia, they assume 11% urban, 49% suburban, and 40% rural. DeKalb and Fulton counties, the two counties that encompass the city of Atlanta, had roughly 12% of the entire Georgia electorate in 2020. The New York Times would have us believe that there are no urban voters anywhere outside of Fulton and DeKalb County in Atlanta, in the state of Georgia.
And again, they might be defining rural as towns with only a Walmart, not a Walmart and a Target. I don't know, some towns with that don't have enough stoplights. It's not clear.
Yeah, I mean, there was someone, whether it was Nate Cohen and Nate Silver, I forget who I saw, but they did say that, yes, they have redefined rural to include small towns that some people might call suburban.
Right.
So what we're saying is these definitions are a little bit meaningless.
Yes.
Yeah, basically. Yes. And
the New York Times should take them out of their sampling. Or out of their weighting, at least. And
at the end of the day, what this is all about is we have gone through so much various political trauma over the last 9 years that people who have suffered trauma run to safety, and a good poll is the closest thing we have to safety until the election is over.
Right, and it all comes down to day of turnout. Of course, there's a large contingent of early voting, absentee voting, but it's all going to come down to turnout, and it's all a guessing game. No one knows. There are so many variables in this election that are different than previous elections. Mm-hmm. That I've always felt, and by the way, I have used and we have discussed polling in our debates before, but really polling should be used by campaigns to decide which states to contest, which states not to spend resources in, how to refine their message. It really is not supposed to be something that voters use as a tool to try to predetermine the outcome of an election.
Yeah, and I think there's internal polling commissioned by campaigns, commissioned by parties, that I think gets a lot more granular and a lot more detailed. And, I don't know if you remember, after 2016, there was someone who commented there was no one less surprised than Hillary Clinton that she lost that night, because she had seen the door-to-door data that her pollsters were bringing her, and she knew that the path to 270 was closed. Right. So the polling we're seeing is a very different animal. And I think it is, to some degree, ego-driven by these people who have created these models, who are creating these weighting structures and are determined to be right, or at the very least not wrong. And so they've created polls in which they are never wrong because there is no actual right answer.
Now, let me ask you guys this. Famously, one of the mistakes that the Clinton campaign made in 2016 was they saw an opportunity in Arizona And in the last couple of days, they moved some resources, including the candidate's time, to Arizona to try to nail down one more state. And some people think that might have cost her one or more of the Rust Belt states, because if you're in Arizona, you can't be in Wisconsin, you can't be in Pennsylvania. Is it possible that the Harris campaign might fall prey to that same mistake this time, that in trying to flip North Carolina, in trying to flip Georgia, they might not put enough resources, let's say, into Pennsylvania that maybe would be wiser?
From what I'm hearing, they're not skimping on Pennsylvania. It's right now the most campaigned in state in the nation. I think the airwaves are wall-to-wall political ads from both campaigns. And they've got a ton of field offices. They've got volunteers out the yin-yang. We're busing people up to Pennsylvania every weekend from my county.
Don't say that. Don't say that. We're not supposed to bus people in. Donald will get mad.
They're just there to like knock on doors. They're not there to vote, as far as I know.
Yeah, I don't think, given the tremendous amount of resources that Harris has, that in many respects Clinton did not have, and even Biden did not have, I'm not really sure you can. I'm not sure you can say that she's at the risk of underinvesting really in any of the states. I think it's clear that their three priorities are Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And I do not think they are underinvesting in any of those three. So I don't think that is necessarily a worry.
And Kevin, I think you do have a point in that it is a worry. It's always a worry. Are we reading the tea leaves wrong? Are we sending people to the wrong place? Is Tim Walz getting off at the wrong bus stop? We can't know until it's over in the final analysis. And we just kind of have to do the best we have with the polling data, with the headlines, and, and with the electoral math to see what we can do.
So let me bring up this meme that is out there, especially in the media, that people are saying they need to know more about Kamala Harris. They need to know more about her policy positions before they can make a determination to vote for her. They've already maybe decided they don't want to vote for Donald Trump, but this woman is a blank slate to them. Now, I'm not saying that. I'm kind of putting into words what I'm hearing in the media, and I want to discuss that with you folks. So who wants to start on that? Do you have any opinions on that?
For the folks most likely to come to her side, these are folks who are center-right or even hard-right on economic issues, but who are very much of the Reagan, Bush, McCain view on international affairs. So when they are saying this kind of thing, she does not have to bring up domestic issues. They're not going to agree with her on domestic issues. It will only cause unnecessary friction. She needs to talk foreign policy. She needs to talk Ukraine. She needs to talk NATO. She needs to talk about how she will continue what the Biden administration is doing, how she will improve on what the Biden administration is doing. She can talk more about what is happening in East Asia, how she will, how she will continue to help Taiwan, how she can help her allies there. Those are the kinds of issues that can win over the largest group of this. I'm not sure if I can vote for Kamala Harris yet.
I think her website has gotten a lot more robust. She has published policy opinions. If you want to see all of them screenshotted helpfully, you can go to my Twitter feed. My pinned post is a thread leading to every single Kamala Harris policy position. You could bookmark it, throw it at trolls if you need to. But I do think that there is something to be said for some sort of national televised event, because it's unclear if she'll get another debate, but a TV town hall or something like that, where she could go on television for 45 minutes or an hour and take questions from an audience of voters, similar to what she just did with Oprah, but without your boomer parents having to figure out how to stream things. I think that would be valuable. And I think there comes a point where, even though I know, we all know that you're 2 clicks away from any information you want, for her to appear responsive to an audience that is asking her to spoon feed them information the way DJ is spoon feeding himself applesauce right now has value.
First of all, I agree with that. Not so much the DJ applesauce, but I agree with what your overall premise is, that yes, the information is available, But I'm not sure that the correct answer is to say to people, go Google it. This is going to be one area where I am going to give some advice to the Harris campaign. Now, I have to preface this by saying I think they are running an absolutely brilliant campaign. And I give them very, very high marks for everything they've done up to this point. But
the campaign is full sigma. It is aura.
It is aura.
It is not mid. It is skibbity toilets, my friend. Actually, I don't know if I used that last one right. Sorry.
But there is no campaign is 100% perfect. And there is one thing that she did in the debate. I heard her do it again in the local television interview that she did late last week, which is when they ask her a policy question, she has been programmed, I assume by her advisors, to start with a 2-minute biographical essay or 2.5 minutes about her growing up in a middle-class home and what her mom said and what she wore to school and where she ate dinner. And I think it's a legitimate critique to say, get to the answer quicker. Get to the policy off the question, not 2.5 minutes later. And I was watching Morning Joe this morning, as I like to do, and Joe Scarborough was addressing this issue. And he said, when I ran for Congress and I was asked a question about jobs, I would go on and he talked about the biographical and the premise part of the question that he would talk on for a minute or more before he answered the specifics of the question. And he said, politicians have been doing this for 100 years, and she's no different than anyone else. And my answer to that is, and that's why it's hurting her, because people are sick of traditional politicians and the way they speak. And I am convinced that if Kamala Harris would answer a policy question very quickly with her specific policy answer, she could put that criticism behind her.
I once heard an analysis of advertising campaigns, and they talked specifically about a McDonald's jingle. And it used to be, ba-da-da-da-da, I'm loving it. And then it was just, ba-da-da-da-da, McDonald's. And then, ba-da-da-da-da. And then eventually just the smile that had been the animated graphic. And she needs to get away from the full jingle and say, well, I've told this story. I grew up in a middle-class household, which is why I know, boom, policy.
Exactly.
She can truncate the introduction part because that's been clipped. It's been memed. We've all shared it on TikTok. So she can get to the meat of it a little bit faster at this point. And it's probably time for that pivot. I'm hopeful that we'll see it soon.
Great. So
I'm sure she's listening to the podcast because she and I are besties, despite what my daughter says.
So being her bestie, how do you think the Get Out the Vote part of the campaign is being handled by each of the two parties?
Now, this is fascinating because, as you all know, I am a huge proponent of, get out there and do something. And I've been a big fan of text banking. I've done postcard writing campaigns. I put out yard signs. I talk about everything on social media. The whole part about being a citizen campaigner for candidates that I support. And the Democratic Party in the past few cycles has made it really easy. There are at least 2 websites that I know of that are interconnected, that are clearinghouses for volunteer opportunities all across the country, candidates at all levels, everything from very generalized get out the vote campaigns to phone calls for a school board candidate in a particular town. And then there are also entities like Vote Save America, Swing Left, Indivisible, the Women for Kamala groups that are all, putting together opportunities and forwarding them out at a national level. And I got curious and went to see if the Republicans are doing anything similar, and I couldn't find anything. I found state parties. They're like, if you want to get involved, email us at this. And they didn't have a list of events that you could show up at or virtual phone banks or text banks that you could go to for stuff outside your district. And just today, there were 2 big articles about this, one in the AP and I think one on NBC, about how the RNC has essentially outsourced the ground game to Turning Point and whatever Elon Musk's shady ass pack is, to try and convert unlikely voters, like newly registered or voters who sat out prior cycles, to try and convert those into Trump voters. Particularly, I think young white men is what they're going for. But there's concerns among kind of the old guard of the Republican Party that these efforts are A, not effective, and B, the traditional base of volunteers are being shut out of the process. They're not getting guidance and they're not getting resources. So what does that mean? What is the upshot? It means the Democrats are on the ground doing a lot, and Republicans are being very targeted, very specific, and also infiltrating boards of elections all over the country, probably to try and stop certification or at least gum up the works pretty badly. And it remains to be seen what that will turn into in the final countdowns.
Mm-hmm.
But that gets, I think, to one of your ongoing concerns, Kevin, about malfeasance the day of the election and then the weeks afterwards.
So to take your lead and make a segue, the next topic on our rundown is Election Day and the day after and the days after that. Before I get into the meat of that, I want to bring up a movie. I've told you guys about it in our little PM thread that we share between shows, but our audience may not know about it. It's a new documentary called War Game, and it shows a simulation that was done by an agency that's associated with the federal government, not an actual federal agency, but one that has done some war game-like simulations before for the Department of Defense. And they got former Montana Governor Steve Bullock to play the president, and they got Wesley Clark to play a national security advisor of sorts, former Senator Heidi Heitkamp to play another national security advisor, and about 10 or 12 people like that to fill out the cast in this simulation. And the simulation was, what happens if on or around January 6, 2025, there is another insurrection, but the insurrectionists are much more organized and it starts to infiltrate the U.S. military. It's a fascinating documentary. If you could find it in your city, I promise you will not be bored. It plays actually like a drama, and it's the edge of your seat kind of viewing. I don't think either of you have had a chance to see it. Maybe you've read about it, but with that as the precursor to this conversation, what are your concerns now? We've seen so far already the attempt in Nebraska to change how they dole out their electoral votes, and that still remains to be seen what's going to happen there. And we're seeing attempts in Georgia to change how they count and how they certify the count in various counties. So with that said, what are your thoughts about where we're going, not just with the actual election, but with how the election is counted and certified?
I'm a lot more worried about the Georgia, Nebraska type things than I am the potential for a well-organized January 6th. Just because I think that is what possibly the Trump campaign is counting on. I think a lot of the type of people who would have rallied to Trump's call are counting on lawyers to do the dirty work. And I don't know how easy it is to create a coalescing event when you do not have the power of the presidency to commandeer Freedom Plaza.
DJ?
Yeah, so far from, I think it was just this morning that one of the state senator in Nebraska, it's one house, it's a Senate, that one of the senators who needed to flip in order for them to change the way their electoral votes are counted said, no, I don't think it's a good idea 6 weeks out from an election. I don't think we should do it. So,
but the concern is that we're banking on that one thoughtful, honest broker in some states to be between us and disaster, which is
well, and I actually trust more a guy who actually wants to be mayor of the largest city in that district and who knows damn well if he accidentally disenfranchises him, it will never happen.
Okay,
he has some skin in the game.
Yeah, but again, counting on that one person to be there to take the stance for whatever reason that's a risky game.
It is risky. I agree.
It's almost like buying Trump social stock and seeing how that'll play out.
Yeah, exactly. Georgia is very concerning, although there will be lawsuits. The Georgia
there already are.
Yeah, there already are. The Georgia Attorney General put out a statement saying, that this is a violation of the law. But the Georgia Republican Party is very, very weird in that regard. So
well, let me ask this specific question. And again, we're just people. We're just speculating like everybody else.
Right.
Let's say Kamala Harris wins Georgia. That within a few days after the election, all the votes are in. AP says Kamala Harris has carried the state. But for whatever reason, because one or two of these counties or one or two of these electoral commissions don't certify their vote count, Brian Kemp cannot certify the state. What happens on January 6th? It goes to the House, it goes to the Senate. We know that according to AP and according to all the factual data that is available to us, the Democratic candidate won the state, but it hasn't been certified. Can the House still count those electoral votes?
That's not going to be the question that's asked. The question that's going to be asked is, who is declared the official winner if Fulton County's vote is never certified?
Right.
Or if Fulton County's vote is thrown into dispute. The name of the game here, the purpose of this is to find some kind of technicality that can wipe out an entire urban county's vote. That's the end game. That's what they're looking to do.
Yeah.
If these bizarre laws, bizarre rules they're talking about actually stay in place, there is a very good chance that they could do that. That Fulton County could slip on something, that it takes them 25 hours instead of 24 hours to complete this count. And this board could step in and say, well, then all of Fulton County's vote is invalid. And that's going to have to go through the state courts. That's going to have to go through the state courts, especially, and possibly even the federal courts before we can have any kind of determination.
The thing is, we won't be doing this on January 5th. I'm looking right now at. No,
I agree. This is November
I'm looking
and December
at
stuff.
Yeah, I'm looking at Georgia's calendar, and they have to certify county results by mid-November, and conduct audits by mid-November. So if these county boards are going to try and be in disaccord with the black letter law, this is codified calendar that is out of a legislative process, and as opposed to these promulgated rules that the election board is putting out right now. If we get to a point where these county election authorities are missing legally binding deadlines, that's the point that the Harris campaign is going to have to start dropping lawsuits, and we'll have 8 weeks.
Well, we know there's going to be lawsuits, but we also know there's a potential for them not to be litigated, not to be resolved by January 6th.
And at the end of the day, the states that are the larger concern are Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And the reason I named those 5 states in particular, and only those 5 states, is because those are the 5 states that have either Republican-controlled legislature or split legislature like Pennsylvania has. If things go to hell in Nevada, for example, Nevada has a Democratic state legislature that someone will step in and go, all right, you idiots know that Kamala Harris won this state, but if we have to actually pass a law saying give the electoral votes to her because she got more votes, then I guess we'll do it, you freaking morons. But North Carolina's legislature has been shown to be, forgive my language, a bunch of dicks. The Georgia legislature created this whole electoral board nonsense in the first place, so they have shown themselves to be a bunch of dicks. Those are the 2 states that I think have the biggest problems because they have very heavy Republican and Trumpist state legislatures who are very willing to stick their fingers at the rest of us and say, we don't really care what you want. This is what we want, and we're going to get it.
Okay, let's, in the last few minutes, change our focus to foreign relations, not so much to the domestic election situation. The 2 questions that we wanted to bounce around between the 3 of us is, should Ukraine be allowed to bomb Russia, and should Israel keep bombing Hezbollah? So, DJ, I'll give you the first shot at those.
Yes to both. Ukraine is already hitting targets deep inside Russia. They're just doing it with high-powered drones instead of the missiles that they want to use that can create much more damage to Russia's military-industrial complex. And they should have the authority and the ability to do that.
Wait, did
Yes.
a former Republican just say military-industrial complex?
Yeah, I have never had a problem with that. I
think
You
the
are
phrase
the
was-
military-industrial
I have
complex.
been a
but
proud
I'm
member of the
I
military-industrial
think
complex
the
for
phrase was
25
coined
years.
by Eisenhower.
I have nothing.
So-
Yes, it was coined by
okay.
Eisenhower.
All right.
He was mad at it. I'm not. So
Right.
just so we're clear here. But Ukraine should not have to fight with a hand tied behind their back. I think the fear, I can understand the fear of Russia resorting to nuclear weapons. But frankly, Russia invaded Ukraine in the first place because they assumed mutually assured destruction. Putin assumed mutually assured destruction meant that we would not ever engage in a nuclear response if he was doing too well in Ukraine.
The assumption, if I'm understanding you correctly, DJ, and I may not have heard it quite the way you meant it, but you're talking about him using nuclear weapons against the West or against the United States. I think the fear is that he might use a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine on the gamble that the United States would not respond in kind with any type of nuclear attack or even any type of direct attack because they do not want to escalate to a nuclear exchange.
I think that is one of the most likely scenario that he was talking about tactical nukes. But but I think he would also keep them just inside the border with Poland so that we're not.
That's what I'm saying.
NATO isn't triggered. Yeah,
he would use it in, and I don't think this is going to happen. By the way, I'm not one of those people that thinks that we have to treat this man with kid gloves. I think that Ukraine should be allowed to fight the war and try to win, because that's the only way that you could win a war, is to try to do damage to the other side. You can't fight with one arm tied behind your back. But I think the concern is that he might make a bad, strategic decision and see if he could get away with something, and that might put NATO in an awkward situation.
The trouble with that is we saw what happened to the nuclear fallout from the Chernobyl disaster in 1986 and how much that actually affected Eastern Europe and parts of Western Europe. A tactical nuclear weapon would likely have similar environmental impacts, and that could be seen as an attack on NATO, and that could be seen as damaging to NATO. And the people around him, who many of whom are old enough to remember Chernobyl, will remember that, and I think we'll tell him and are telling him that is too much of a risk to him internally. I don't think he can get the regime behind him to launch a tactical nuclear weapon against Ukraine.
Okay. Rebecca, did you have anything before I mouth off?
I mean, it goes back to what we were just saying about Nebraska. Like, yeah, it's great when the one guy stands up and makes sure the bad thing doesn't happen. I don't know that we necessarily want to credit anybody in Putin's regime with being willing to stand up and make sure the bad thing doesn't happen. Yeah. But that being said, I am in support of Ukraine being able to take offensive measures.
Yeah, so am I. And in terms of Israel, should they keep bombing Hezbollah? I've formulated a peace plan for the Middle East. I know people have been trying this for centuries, and certainly it's one of the most difficult international quagmires that we face. But I believe I've got the solution to the Middle East problem. I believe I've got the solution to the problems that Hezbollah and Hamas and Iran have with Israel. And it boils down to a very elegant solution. Stop attacking Israel. You want peace in the Middle East? Stop sending missiles into Israel. You want peace in Israel between the Palestinians and the non-Palestinians? Stop sending terrorists into Jewish settlements. It is so fucking simple. And I have empathy and sadness in my heart for the lost lives of innocents. But this war will only end when Hezbollah stops raining missiles into Israel and when Hamas stops trying to take over Israel from the river to the sea.
And I think with Hezbollah, I think the rest of the world sort of held its breath. Like, is there going to be a shootout war with Hezbollah? Hezbollah has a lot of political disadvantages vis-a-vis Hamas. One, Hezbollah is not trying to liberate anyone. Lebanon is its own. In fact, Lebanon is its own country, much of which would like to be liberated from Hezbollah rather than the other way around. Israel is not occupying any part of Lebanon. They haven't for 25 years. So anything Israel does vis-a-vis Hezbollah, yes, there are Lebanese that will be hurt. There are citizens that will be hurt. But there will also be Lebanese who are outside of Hezbollah control who will be very happy to loudly say, this is all Hezbollah's fault, which is something the people of Gaza can't do because they are Hamas is in much greater control of Gaza than Hezbollah is over Lebanon. So Israel absolutely can and should defend itself against Hezbollah. And I think what they will find is that it is much easier politically to defend themselves against Hezbollah because Hezbollah is not a Palestinian organization that is holding Palestinian sovereignty as a hostage. They are very clearly an irredentist, terrorist, tyrannical group that wants to impose violent, tyrannical Shia Islam on everybody. Hamas can hide under, we're just doing this for Gaza. Hezbollah can't.
What you're saying, it's pure aggression. It's pure.
Yes. Yeah. It's pure aggression, and it is it's much easier for people to see. People should be able to see it in Hamas too, but Hamas has PR cards to play that Hezbollah does not have.
Yeah.
Well, Hamas had PR cards to play until they abandoned the citizens of Gaza.
Well, with that, we want to thank everybody for listening. If you enjoy what we do here, please follow us on Instagram at MPU Podcast and on our Substack page, which I believe is the MPU Substack or the More Perfect Union Substack. Does anybody know for sure what our name is?
One of those. It definitely has the word Substack in the name.
Where DJ posts some wonderful articles. I occasionally try to keep up with him there.
It's mpupodcast.substack.com.
Can't be more specific
none of
than
us
that.
know what it was called. That's amazing. We're so good at this.
And of course, don't forget to share our link on your Facebook timeline so your friends can discover us as well. Of course, we always thank Alan Keeney for our theme music. And with that, how do you guys plan to spend the rest of September?
I'm going to be drinking hot apple cider and waiting for it to actually get cold. I mean, it's still 80 degrees here.
More applesauce, more pain meds. That's my week.
Sounds good to me. Okay, that's a podcast.